I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, where I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the applied science and bewitchery of brand and business storytelling, so that you can clarify your story to amplify your impact and simplify your life.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Welcome to the Business of Story. I am so glad you are here today listening in, because as the title says, this show is more about story listening than storytelling. And we have an absolute expert that is going to take us through this whole process. And the reason why I think it's important anyways, and just ask yourself this as well, how often have you gone into a boardroom to present some really important information, and maybe you only have a couple people who actually appear to be listening to you? Or how about sitting across from a colleague and they're most likely on their phone doing something else, and they think they're listening, but they're really doing that swipe/listening, multitasking thing, and you realize that it's a hollow conversation at best because, well, there's just not listening going on. So you're not getting the understanding and the connecting. Or how about just being out with friends? And it seems like you don't have to say a word for hours. All you have to do is just sit there as everybody else seems to try to dominate the conversation. I've got some ideas, and I think a lot of it has to do coming from the age of the internet and us on there trying to share our stories and maybe feeling like people just aren't listening. So when we actually get into the company of somebody, we tend to go blah, 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 or they do that to us, and we don't end up with that wonderful ping pong match of conversation and storytelling. It becomes very one-sided, like a broken pong game, if you will, and it just doesn't work. So after 157 or so episodes here at the Business of Story, we talking about storytelling, we are going to focus on story listening. How do you actually get your audiences prepared to be with you, to be present, to be in the room, and to be in your story as you share it? And also, how can you use these same techniques to also become a better story listener? Because you know what? When it comes to storytelling, it really starts with story listening. So today I am so excited to bring you Dr. Murray Nossel. He is the author of the brand new and fantastic book. Highly recommend you add this to your library, called Powered by Storytelling: Excavate, Craft, and Present Stories to Transform Business Communication. I sat down with this book a couple weeks ago, and I mean within about 4.5 hours, I went through the whole thing. I could not put it down, and it's just a wonderful reference. And it's no wonder, because this guy has got an amazing background in sociology, personal communications, and storytelling. Murray, he practiced as a clinical psychologist before obtaining a doctorate in social work at Columbia University, where he taught an advanced research methods course in life histories and narratives. He is an executive coach at Columbia Business School, and is also an Oscar-nominated documentary filmmaker, teacher, and performer. Nossel currently directs Narativ, a company he co-founded with Paul Brode, which has developed a specialized methodology to train individuals, groups, and organizations in the skills and the art of storytelling and story listening. And look, he plays with the big boys. Narativ's clients, they include Walt Disney Company, Time Warner, New York Habitat, the Radisson Hotels, and more. He teaches this program around the world. We've got a ton of other credentials that we're going to talk about throughout the show. So you know what? Why don't we just get after it? And let's get Murray on the show right now. Murray, welcome to Business of Story.
Thank you so much for having me, Park. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the irony, of course, between you and I, Murray, and all of this in the story listening show is we had actually attempted to record this about 2 weeks ago, and you were coming to us from your home out in, I believe, New Jersey. Is that right? Overlooking the mountains and a river and all that?
Oh, correct. Yes, actually, I'm in upstate New York, overlooking the Delaware River. And there we were. For me, it was a perfect scene to be doing the podcast with you, but we had technological difficulties resulting in the fact that you actually couldn't hear me. Now, if you want to talk about an obstacle to listening, not being able to hear is probably top of the pops.
Well, I was fortunate because I was making out parts and pieces of your answers, which a lot of that came from your book, and I had just read your book, so I was able to kind of navigate along. But after about 40 minutes into it, I just thought, this is ludicrous. We're doing a show on listening, and I can't even hear my guests. So, Murray, thank you for taking the time. You're coming to us now from your apartment in New York, and we have a much better connection. Great to have you here.
Well, great to be here. Thank you.
So before we jump into listening, I was going through your bio and looking at a few other things that you have done. It's quite amazing. So looking down through this, you've done the storytelling performance, Two Men Talking, which has been performed at the Edinburgh Festival on London's West End and off-Broadway in New York. What is that performance about?
Well, thanks for asking. That in some way is where this all begins for me. And what better way to tell you about it than to actually tell you the story? Because one of the things we really know about storytelling, right, is that it's all about showing and not about telling. Storytelling is not about a presentation of data, and it's not a litany of opinions, judgments, and interpretations. Storytelling is simply an account of what happened, hopefully an artful account of what happened. So before I begin to tell this story, I would like to just thank you so much, Park, for your listening, because as you've already said in your introduction about me, I see the most important component of telling a story is its reciprocal relationship with listening. Story depends on listening for its very existence. Listening is the air that stories breathe in. So if you weren't listening so attentively to my story would have nowhere to go right now. I'd be telling it to no one, and I'd quickly stop telling it. So you can actually see listening as the bowl and telling as the liquid poured into that bowl. Now, just as the bowl gives the liquid its shape, so does listening give storytelling its shape. So I'm quite confident that even though you're in Arizona and I am here in New York City, and I can't see you right now, nonetheless, there's already something about the quality of our communication and connection with one another where my story is going to be shaped by the way that you're listening.
And when you say shaped, Murray, if I'm here half listening and kind of interrupting and gazing off somewhere, and you as the storyteller feel like, well, I'm not really quite connecting yet with Park. So does that become like a test tube vial of a vessel where, boy, you're not getting a lot of depth? Well, you would be getting depth in that case. But I mean, it changes how you tell the story. If I am totally engaged and leaning in, then that even shapes how you then tell the story to me.
Absolutely, Park. And let's take this one step further. To be truly honest to my method, why don't we try it out right now? And I would say to you, Park, are there currently any obstacles in your listening? In other words, is anything getting in the way of your listening right now?
And anyway, like just meaning what's going on in my head, or what do I have in my hand, or what am I looking on my computer screen, that kind of thing?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I'll give you the list, actually. So it could be environmental, right? So maybe it's boiling hot in wherever you're sitting, or it's very, very cold, right? Or maybe there's road work going on outside and there are jackhammers going. So that would be what I would call environmental or external obstacles. But the obstacles may be in your own mind. So for instance, you may have a lot of thoughts running around in your head. You may be thinking about something you're going to be doing later today, or a trip you're going to take this weekend, or an argument you had with someone, or whatever the case may be. there may just be emotions surging. Maybe you're just feeling emotional because of something that's happened. There could also be judgments that you've got. You might be judging me at this moment in time. You might be judging yourself at this moment in time. And then the other thing that can affect our listening are relations of power. So are there any power relations that are currently affecting your listening? It could be, for instance, that you are having to send a proposal off to someone today and they're in some position of authority or control over you. And so therefore your listening is being affected by a power relation. So these are the various kinds of obstacles that we can encounter in our listening. And what the method calls us to do is develop a self-awareness about these obstacles and actually articulate them to the person who's speaking, so that they have a full picture of what your bowl of listening is like.
Okay, so let me articulate what my bowl of listening looks like. So here I sit in every single one of these interviews, and on one hand, I'm listening to the conversation, but I'm also, the other side of my brain, trying to anticipate maybe where it's going to go so I can actually sound smart and ask a good follow-on question. So I know that definitely gets in the way of my listening. It's not like just having a regular conversation if you and I were sitting across the table from each other. Add to that a very important call I have at 10:30 this morning. So that has been kind of rumbling around in my mind, but I know I'm trying to push that away, try to be present, in this moment. Add to that my two screens I have up. I've got one screen with my Zencastr recording to make sure technologically everything's working. And we know what happens when that doesn't. And then on the other screen, I have bios about you and your background so that I can stay on top of it as an interviewer. Now add to that, I didn't have breakfast this morning because this is a fairly early interview for me at 8 a.m. I had to forego my yoga class, no big deal. Got up. So I have a glass of water. I have a half-drunk Martinelli's apple juice to get my blood sugar going. I've just finished off my bowl of oatmeal from Starbucks, and I've got my Starbucks tall with room coffee sitting here. Besides that, I have nothing else going on in my head, so I'm just totally here listening to you.
Now, that was remarkably well done. So you've basically created for me now what we could call a listening landscape, right? I understand now how you're listening and also the self-awareness that you've brought to your listening sort of has a paradoxical effect. So just by naming these obstacles to listening, you are releasing them. And the one thing that I will say to you is that we never push anything away. Pushing creates counter resistance, right? If we push at something, it's likely to push back. So what we want to do is just release and let go. And by speaking it to me, you can release it and let it go. Now, if you didn't have your apple juice there and you hadn't just had your oatmeal, then it could have been that your hunger could have been an enduring obstacle to listening. So good that you took care of that. And thanks so much. Now, I'm going to tell you about any obstacles to listening I may have at the moment, which is also part and parcel of how we would do any kind of meeting or workshop or session with an organization. We all go around the table, whether you're telling a story or listening to a story, and you say what your obstacles to listening are. So I'd say that my only obstacle to listening at the moment is that I have a couple of deadlines approaching. And so I am aware of the fact that they are going to go in at the end of this day. But other than that, I am able for this time of our podcast to let that go and just be completely present with you.
So, Murray, just that act of naming what may be, interfering with that listening, that disrupting the conversation, allows us then as people just to release it instead of, like you said, push it away. I'll say, all right, I'm not going to worry about that and push it away. It just pushes back. But just by naming it is kind of that passive jujitsu way of saying, all right, I know it's there. I'll deal with it later, but it doesn't have to bother me right now.
That's absolutely right. And what we do to add just one more layer to that, okay, is that now we've named our obstacles to listening. What we're going to do is we're going to create a one-word intention that is going to direct our minds towards how we are going to be listening, right? So I'm going to say that my one word is going to be presence. And would you just tell me one word now which characterizes how you're going to be listening?
Focused.
Fabulous. And now I'm ready to tell you my story.
All right. This is the story of two men talking.
Exactly.
All right.
So this story begins in 1974 in Johannesburg, South Africa, at the King David High School. And it's the first day of high school. And the teacher says to this group of 12-year-old kids that are sitting there, turn to the person next to you and tell one another a story. And Paul goes first. He's sitting next to me and he tells me a story. And when he's done, he says to me, so Murray, what's your story? And I say, oh, I don't have a story. Oh, go on. You must have a story. Everyone's got a story. No, really, I just don't have one. And I went red from top to toe. My body became hot and I just felt the sort of sweat coming off my brow. Now, outside the classroom, Paul was not one of those kids that called me names. And many of the boys called me names. Every single day as I stood in front of the canteen to buy my food, I'd hear, Murray, you sissy, Murray, you queer, Murray, you faggot. I mean, it was constant. But Paul never said anything like that to me. One day, this was our second to last year in high school, what we call Form 4 in South Africa. The teacher, the Afrikaans teacher, cannot control the class. And she herds us out of the classroom into the corridor. And she says, if you can't behave like adults, I'm going to treat you like kids. Now, everybody line up, girls on the left, boys on the right. And at that moment, Paul points to me and says, Murray in the middle. And he laughs uproariously. And of course, I go red from top to toe again. And the class burst into laughter. Well, we're on the university campus now. I'm studying psychology, and Paul has started medical school, which you start right away in South Africa. There's no pre-med. You go straight into medical school. And he walks over to me one day where I'm now, the cool guy on campus. I've got long blonde hair and I smoke Camel cigarettes, and I'm surrounded by a battalion of beautiful boys and girls. And Paul says hi to me, and I just turn my head the other way as if he doesn't exist. So 15 years later, I leave South Africa, I leave my clinical psychology practice, and I come to New York City to be a playwright. And a friend of mine runs the Knitting Factory in New York, which has a fabulous black box theater. And she says, Murray, you need a director for your play. And she introduces me to a French-Canadian fellow by the name of Seymour. Now I meet Seymour. I've sent him my play. We used to send plays by mail in those days, by snail mail. Yeah. And I meet with Seymour, and he says to me, look, Murray, I think I'd like to direct your play. But by the way, you do come from Johannesburg, right? And you went to the school called King David. Do you by any chance know my boyfriend? I say, well, who would that be? And he says, it's Paul Brody. No Same guy. So there I am now in the lobby of the Knitting Factory in New York City, having just walked out of the very first performance of my play. And there stands this guy that I've known from the age of 12. And he walks up to me and he says, great play, Murray. By the way, do you remember something that I said to you at school? And I said, you mean Murray in the middle? And he said, oh my God, that has been plaguing me. For all these years, I felt so guilty about it. I'm so sorry. He apologized. And in that moment of him apologizing, it was like a knot that had been twisted in my stomach suddenly just began to untwist. And Paul and I began talking every single day on the phone. He was working in a clinic in the Bronx. I was working in a clinic on Staten Island. And we started telling one another all those stories that we had never told one another in the past because we were essentially enemies. Mm-hmm. Now, 6 weeks after our first meeting, Paul and I were on the train down to Brooklyn, and he said, Murray, there's something I have to tell you. And he said, I am HIV positive. Well, you can imagine the blood just rushed out of my face. My heart just sank.
Mm-hmm.
And I had known people who had died of AIDS in South Africa. In fact, as a clinical psychologist, I treated the second person in the country to die of AIDS. And I just saw Paul disappearing and dying in the same way. Well, the good news is that Paul never died. And he's still alive and well. And the very story that I've just told you forms the skeleton of an improvised performance piece, which is called Two Men Talking. And Paul and I have gone around the world telling this story, essentially, of our friendship. But each time it's completely different because we always bring new stories into the mix, depending on what rises to the surface of our consciousness in that moment. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's because we are providing a brand new bowl of listening for one another each time. And so are the audience providing us with their bowl of listening. So every different audience is listening differently. And if you are truly connecting with your audience in the moment, you will never be able to tell the same story twice because everyone's listening differently.
Now, Murray, I want to ask you that moment when he apologized and you said it felt like that knot unwinding in your gut. And after 15 years, you were able to release that. What did you learn about yourself and about humanity in general at that moment that surprised you?
Well, I think there are a number of different things, Park. I just love that question so much, and I'm just going to ponder it. I think the first thing is that we human beings are inevitably going to hurt one another, be it consciously or unconsciously. So in that moment that Paul called me out and said, Murray in the middle, he was unable to tolerate his own hidden feelings of being gay. And what better way than to project them out onto me and make a fool out of me, thereby taking the attention off himself and also kind of, sort of expunging whatever uncomfortable feelings he had about himself onto me. Now, don't we do that all the time? Mm-hmm. That, we are responsible for something, we are accountable for something, but we end up blaming somebody else. This happens in business all the time. The blame game, someone else is to blame rather than taking responsibility for what you've done or said. So when Paul came up to me in that theater that night and he said, I'm sorry, he was taking responsibility for what he said, and he was acknowledging the fact that it had hurt me. And just hearing that acknowledgement allowed me, to let it go, because it's almost like when these hurtful things happen to us, they get lodged in our bodies, right? We're hearing so much at the moment about, sexual abuse and sexual malpractices and the way people are still carrying these old wounds that have happened in their actual bodies. And so when someone apologizes or acknowledges what they've done, somehow it allows one to release that tension in one's body where the memory is being held. Our bodies are where our stories are held. And so his apology allowed me to access my story in my body and release it a bit. So I could go on and talk about that for quite some time, but I think those are the first things that come to mind.
And I think you make a good point there when, at least my experience, listening isn't just listening with your ears. It's being there and watching and reading body language. And it's so much more physical than just hearing what's going on. How often do we meet somebody or we're in a meeting or whatever, and they seem standoffish to us, or they seem like a bully or a snob to us. And we immediately take it personally and we take offense to it. And we're like, oh, that person doesn't like me, or they think they're so much better than me, when in actuality, they don't feel that great about themselves, probably. And they're projecting that onto you through maybe an attitude of being a bully or being quiet or a snob. And we totally misread that. We mislisten to that particular give and take. And we often just make all the wrong judgments at that moment versus just taking a deep breath and really observing and, taking in everything, all the stimulus that's going on in that situation. So listening goes beyond just hearing.
Exactly. And, I'm just going to add there that listening also involves the heart, right? And this is one of the big things when I go into companies that I have to say to them, you are listening from your hearts as well. You do not check your heart out at the front door when you walk into the business. And if you do, boy, are you only in trouble. So how can we actually cut parts of ourselves off? We can't function as full human beings if we do. And when you're talking about story and the importance of story, you are in fact talking about the connection of mind to heart. You are connecting ideas to emotions. That's why stories move us. That's how stories work. So if your heart is cut off, how can you possibly tell a story effectively or listen to a story effectively? And then the other thing part, how often have you had that feeling where you had a gut feeling about something, right? But you didn't go with your gut feeling. You went with some kind of other rational process. And then afterwards, you kind of kick yourself and you say, man, I had a gut feeling about that. Why did I not just follow it?
Yeah.
Right? We've all had those experiences.
Yeah.
2
weeks ago, I was asked to be in a debate at the Arizona Governor's Conference on Tourism. There were 500 destination marketing management people in the audience. We did it over at the Camelback Inn, and they brought in this young, very sharp, handsome, quick-witted research guy. And the debate, Murray, was research versus intuition and art when it comes to creating creative campaigns. My argument they gave me was I had to defend creativity. And of course, the answer in this, and we both agreed going in that you have to have both. You have to have research to help inform the creative, but you don't want it to overrun the creative because then you start, giving research and logic away, your intuition away to research and logic, and that's just not how humans beings operate. So after the whole thing, my closing statement was, so the next time your big data folks show up to you at your desk and they roll out all of this wonderful research and you take in all of that information and you filter through all of your experience, I want you to ask your gut, what does it think? And that was my closing argument. By the way, I won 60-40 over that first debate I ever did, other than debating with my 6 siblings growing up. But I'm with you that it is about listening and being a story receptor with your head, with your heart, with your gut, taking it all in. And then sometimes even closing your eyes and asking yourself, what does this feel like? What does my answer actually feel like versus thinking it through and then arriving at what you're going to do next?
Yes. Now, I've got so many business examples of this. As you're talking, I'm sort of like, okay, hiring. Okay, you're hiring someone in an executive position, right? And you bring them in for the interview and you look at their resume and man, they are cracking. They got a PhD at an Ivy League school. They've done this, they've done that. They've worked on big accounts. And you then ask them to tell you a story about themselves. That's what I always do. And that's what I train people to do. Is that you ask a person to tell a story and you are going to really evaluate them and their fit for the job based on the story. So one of the questions I sometimes ask is, can you tell me your history of being sitting in this chair opposite me right now? What brought you here? Tell me about the story or the trajectory of which this current moment is the end. And this person tells this actually has happened to me, and this on more than one occasion, the person tells a story, and my gut goes, something's off here. And often it has to do with the quality of the person's listening. They're not really listening. They are pretending to listen. They're faking listening. They literally are just waiting for the next thing to say. So the way that a person listens is diagnostic for me. It tells me something about that person and the quality of the relationship in the moment. but it has happened that I don't follow my gut instinct. I go with what the person is maybe promising. They say, well, I've got all these contacts in this area and that area. And, my sort of ambition overrides my gut instinct. So that's the one. The second is somebody's trying to sell you something, right? They're coming, they want you to invest in their company, and they present you with a lot of data and a lot of figures saying, by May of next year, we'll have a 60% return on investment. And by the end of the year, we will have doubled, you'll have doubled your investment. Okay. Yes. And they show you all these facts and figures, and it all looks very good. Now, can you tell me a story, please, about where this has happened before? Where has this success actually been evidenced before? And can you please create for me a future narrative about how you think we are going to achieve this? Now, if this person just starts filling up that space with a whole bunch of vague opinions and promises, you're going on the wrong track. So story is a way of actually evidencing facts and figures. So I'm just aligning myself, and I'm not surprised that you won 60-40.
Well, what really it underscored to me, Murray, is the power of story. I'm so busy coaching and teaching and working with other people that I often don't find myself in that kind of environment where I'm having to go head to head with someone. And I got to tell you, this guy was very bright, funny, creative. He rolled out in his argument, his first 6-minute argument, litany after litany of stats and facts and why it's important, opinions and assertions. And I just countered it with stories, an event after an event after an event to make my points. And I think that's, one of the reasons why we won it over. My question for you, Murray, that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking right now is this is all well and good, guys, but how do I honestly go into my boardroom? And you know what? I'm just a middle manager. I've got my bosses and my leaders in there. How do I get them to listen, to use this technique? What would you tell me? Say, okay, Murray, I am a 32-year-old middle manager in a bank, and I have to go in and present an internal initiative to build camaraderie around Blue Jeans Day on Friday, and I've got to sell 9 of my bosses on what they're going to think is a ridiculous idea. And when I go in there, I'm going to be dealing with men and women that are 45 to 70. Some of them are going to be on their phones. Some of them are going to be looking out the window. Some of them are going to be asking themselves, why is Park in here taking up my time and my energy? How do I actually walk into that room and with a straight face get them to start listening? Do I take them through a listening exercise, or what do I do?
Okay, such a terrific case study. So let's take this step by step, okay? So the first thing is that there's a little Tibetan Buddhist tale that I tell in my book, and it's called The Lion's Gaze. And the way that this is actually more of a lesson than a tale. And the lesson goes like this. When you throw a ball to a dog, the dog follows the ball. But when you throw a ball to a lion, the lion keeps its gaze on you. So this is a little lesson called the lion's gaze. And when you are going in to talk to your bosses about Blue Jeans Day on Friday, you are keeping your lion's gaze on them. Your focus is on them. You are not there to preoccupy and judge yourself, or to sit there feeling like jittery and afraid, because otherwise, what's the point? So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to ask, what is the message that I want to convey to these people? What's the message, right? So the message might be in that situation, gentlemen and ladies, there's been a kind of a problem with morale out there. I don't know if you're so aware of it, but there's been a problem with morale. And, the one day we tested out people coming on Fridays just wearing blue jeans and whatever they wanted. And it just made the world of difference. People had smiles on their faces, and so even came up to me and told me blah, 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 right? So you've got the message, and you've also got a story, something that actually happened, that shows how your message is materialized, shows the reality of your message. So you've got to go into that meeting prepared. You've got to know what the message is that you want to convey. You've got to know what story you're going to tell to convey that message. And that story has to be a sequence of events that happened.
And is that, Murray, just asking yourself what happened? I mean, answering that question. So here's my point I'm trying to make, and I need to illustrate it by just telling them what happened, what you've experienced.
Yes, what happened? Just like you said to me, you went to this conference last week and you were up against this guy. Or I told you the story of how I met this kid in high school and how we went on to meet one another later in life. These are both accounts simply of what happened. It's not just, you could have said to me, look, Murray, all these people who are sort of data crazy are jerks, right? That's an opinion. It's a judgment. It's an interpretation. It doesn't tell me anything apart from, how you feel about such things. However, if you tell me just what happened, then I can make up my mind for myself. It's kind of legalistic in its own way, because what you're doing is you are presenting evidence, and evidence is never a judgment, opinion, or interpretation. So then what we do is we know our lion's gaze is going to be on those seniors or managers. We know our lion's gaze on them. We know that we don't have a lot of time. We know what the message is we want to convey. We know what story we want to tell to convey that message, to show that message. And then we simply come in and say, thank you so much for your time. I know we've only got 15 minutes for this meeting, so you are actually setting the parameters. And then you acknowledge them and thank them for their listening. Thank you so much for all being here. Your willingness to listen to what I have to say is of crucial importance to me, because otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. Is there anything that's currently getting in the way of anyone's ability to listen?
So you would actually ask that? So you're looking at your leaders, say, is there anything getting in your way from you?
Yeah, do any of you going to need to take a call or going to have to leave the office, just so that I know?
Yeah.
Then someone may say, yeah, well, I've got to get out of here at 1:15 sharp. Okay, thanks so much for letting me know. I'm going to be quick now. So you basically just set up that reciprocity between listening and telling, and you let them know how important their listening is to you. And this, if you don't take anything away from this podcast, apart from this fact, then please remember this. Acknowledge your listeners. Thank them for listening. Let them know that their listening makes a difference to your story, and that without their listening, your story would lose its potency.
So you literally thank them. Now, do you even thank them before or after, or a little bit both? I mean, I'm happy to be here. Want to make sure. Does anyone have to take a call? We only have 15 minutes. Great. You understand the parameters, and then you say, and I thank you for this time, for listening to me, because I have something valuable to say. Is that when you say that?
Well, in a 15-minute session, you'll say it once in the beginning, and then at the end, you'll say thank you for listening again.
That's great.
And then, of course, there's the in this situation that you've given is also the call to action, right? So thank you so much for listening. I think I've given you all the information you need to now make the decision about whether you're going to authorize Blue Jeans Day on Friday. Looking forward to hearing from you. And that's it. And then zip your lip and stand there. They may say something there and then. You can ask them if they've got any questions, which you can answer very briefly. And that's it.
Yeah.
So you've got to be prepared, and you don't want to give too much information.
Right. Now, Murray, you have been in this world of communication, social work, storytelling for decades. Not like me, but you probably a little bit longer. Do you find, maybe as I have, and this is a total opinion on my end, but I mean, it just seems to proof itself out time and time again, that our digital devices are the biggest enemy to listening, because not only is it hard when you're sitting across from somebody and they're on their digital device, it's hard to get, their attention, but we get so accustomed, our brain spinning 100 miles an hour, multitasking, several different directions, that even when we try to take a deep breath, sit down in that conference room as one of the leaders and listen to an underling or listen to anybody come in, that our brains has this muscle memory of multitasking. And so it's more difficult now than ever to get people to listen to your stories.
Yes. I think they've been finding recently that all the little notifications that go off, the buzzes and the beeps and the vibrations, our minds actually become addicted to these kinds of things. So we are waiting for the next ping to come in. We're waiting for the next vibration. It gives us a little thrill. It gives us a little stimulus every time it comes through. So that's the first thing, that we've actually become addicted to the instant responsiveness of these devices. The second thing is they are multiply stimulating. So, you might be sitting in a business meeting where someone's going through the financial projections for next year, and you find yourself drifting off. And in the meantime, some person that you're very attracted to has just sent you a sexy text, Now, what's going to be more compelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, we know that A, these devices are very distracting, and B, the second thing that I've encountered, in fact, with a startup company that I write about in my book, is that they're calling a lot of meetings because it's a startup. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made very rapidly, and people come to these meetings. But half of the people come to the meetings feeling like they shouldn't be there in the first place, and so they're under the table on their phones or on their laptops working on something else during the meeting. So they sort of ostensibly showing up, but they aren't really there. So when you come into a meeting, you've got to know why you're in that meeting. Again, or, you ask yourself the question, why am I in this meeting and why now? And that I'm not only in this meeting to speak, I'm in this meeting to listen. My listening makes a difference. So that's why we have to go around the table and say what could potentially be getting in the way of our listening in this meeting. Now, if you say, listen, my babysitter has just gone home sick, and I'm waiting to hear from my mother-in-law to see whether she's going to be able to go over to my house to take care of the kids. So I will be looking at my phone from time to time to see what's going on. Then at least we sitting around the table know why you're looking at your device. But a lot of times people feel this meeting is a waste of time, therefore I'm going to multitask. So they actually think that they're being more productive, whereas in fact, by not being present in that meeting, by not bringing their listening to the meeting, they're missing half of the stuff that's going on, which is all going to have to be reiterated at some later date. So technology is very destructive in meetings where you really need to communicate important information. And so really, you find this so often, could you please put your phones down? Could you silence your phones? And this particular company where people were bringing their laptops into meetings, either to take notes or to sort of multitask during the meeting, they made the decision that there were going to be no further laptops brought into meetings, and there was going to be one dedicated note keeper who on paper would use pen and paper to actually note down the minutes of the meetings, so that everybody else really didn't need to jot anything down. It was all going to be given to them so that they could simply be present in body and mind as they listened to what was going on.
Yeah, call me old-fashioned, but when I sit in meetings, I use pen and paper, and I still take notes after notes after notes. And whenever somebody else is in that meeting and they're taking their notes on their laptop, there's always a side of me that says, are they actually taking notes about this meeting, or are they answering emails, or are they ordering new shoes from Zappos?
Precisely.
It's like,
and how do what impact does that have on you as you're sharing something? And then particularly if you're sharing a personal story, particularly if you're sharing something that's kind of meaningful to you. And now there's someone sitting in the back row on their phone texting away, it's kind of insulting in a way. It kind of hurts our feelings in a way. And you need to be able to, if you're in a large auditorium, for instance, and people are doing this, you need to just be able to refresh yourself and say, listen, that person on their phone is an obstacle in my listening. I'm just going to have to release it and let it go so that I can connect with my audience.
Yeah. And just what you said there, Murray, goes back to something we discussed earlier about the physical nature of storytelling. When you're telling a story and somebody isn't paying attention and listening wholeheartedly, it hurts your feelings. You physically repel from it. So it's another example of how that reciprocity is so critical in a storytelling and a story listening environment. How do we say, okay, so do you have an exercise, and maybe this is just like foolhardy, it doesn't actually exist, but we are all under the spell of digital multitasking and not listening. Are there actually listening exercises that we can do on ourselves if we are cognizant enough that we're a leader, we're trying to grow, and we know that our success and the success of our team is going to be based on being able to listen, to understand each other, to have empathy for one another, to appreciate where we are so that we can pull together. But I know that listening is getting in my way. Are there tools, techniques that I could do every single day to strengthen that listening muscle?
There certainly are techniques you could be doing every day, Park. I spent 42 minutes today meditating in silence before engaging in this podcast with you. So this was my preparation for being on the podcast. And in that 42-minute meditation, I was able to identify and release all my obstacles to listening with myself. Now, I've been meditating for a long time, and 42 minutes may be very long for most people. But if you just take 2 minutes to ask yourself, what are currently my obstacles to listening? I'm just going to sit silently for a minute, and then I'm going to just jot down what my obstacles to listening. Just that act of doing that, it's just going to take 2 minutes, is actually going to be a reset button for you. It's like hitting a pause, hitting a stop, and recalibrating. Now, what happens to many of us is that we find ourselves addicted to the adrenaline that's driving us forward. And all of these pings and devices and multiple stimuli are keeping the adrenaline activated, and we're drinking cups of coffee to keep ourselves stimulated throughout the day. So that the very act of stopping for 2 minutes seems like an insurmountable task. We just cannot bring ourselves to do it. So if you do want to relax your mind for a moment, then yes, you do go onto the website to find yourself a pair of shoes. But just that act of taking a little time to check in with your listening, a moment for introspection, that's all we're talking about. But if you also bring the practice into your group settings, when you're having meetings, when you're meeting as a team, and you go around the table, identifying your obstacles to listening, naming them, and then setting an intention about how you're going to be in the meeting, well, that's another practice for doing it. So I don't think that this question is off the mark. In fact, I think the question that you ask is totally relevant. Listening, like anything else, is a discipline and it's a practice. And it begins with you being able to check in with yourself, literally listen to yourself in order that you can listen to other people.
That's a really interesting, very simple exercise that any team, we're working with a new client here in town in the solar business, and we are helping them with their overall new brand storytelling. And it's about power for the people. It's not about solar power. It's about your right to the free energy that solar brings to your home, and who are the utilities to say otherwise. And one of the points in the brand story is personal energy. bringing yourself, showing up every day to be the best you can be and bringing your energy to the job of the solar energy world so that their customers can, realize the freedom of solar and that sort of thing. And a part of this then employee activation is about, what is your synchronization with the day? Are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon person? Are you an evening person? And when should you be doing the heavy lifting intellectual tasks? And when should you be doing the more creative, intuitive tasks? So helping their people identify, when are they literally operating at their optimum as an individual? But it just occurred to me, and you just gave me a great idea, Murray, that they could even bring into then every session they have two exercises. Okay, we're having a meeting at 9, Murray, and you are head of customer support, and we're going to be having a half-hour meeting on such and such. Get in the practice of before that meeting, take 2 minutes in your cubicle. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and identify what's on your plate right now. It is that 2-minute listening reset button. Identify what's on the obstacles to listening so that you can release them. And then have everybody make this a practice. Have everybody then come into that meeting at 9:00 and then go around the table to emphasize that even more. Say, look at our personal energy and the ability for us to service our clients in the best possible way always starts with listening. So now you've all done the 2-minute reset. Let's go around the room and what obstacles did you identify in that? Boom, they do it very quickly. Everybody builds a little bit of understanding and greater appreciation for their fellow colleagues and what's on their plate. 5 minutes now, 9:05, you have everybody's attention. And all of a sudden that 1-hour meeting could maybe become a 20-minute meeting.
Yes. And if you do have the 1-hour meeting, you can use it very productively. So take this, for instance, okay? So you've got everyone's listening. And you've given the example of this person who's now customer facing, right? They're listening to customers' stories about solar energy. Maybe they're listening to the customer's questions, right? Now, what better way to communicate what's going on with your customer base than to share stories about what's happened? And in my book, there's the story of this fellow from the medical insurance company, who he's a call center operator. And somebody phones in with a tremendous problem with their husband who refuses to use a sleep apnea machine. And this call center operator talks this woman through the situation by sharing his own story of using a sleep apnea machine. Now, that story told by that call center operator was so powerful and so persuasive that the entire company used it in their ad campaign. So, in fact, once you've got people's listening, you have primed them to actually listen to stories that you have to tell about what's going on in the field. So, it's a win-win situation there when storytelling is concerned.
I love it. Well, your book is really amazing. I read a lot of storytelling books. A lot of folks that want to come on the show send me their books. Some make it on and some don't. And when I sat down here, I thought, okay, here we go again, powered by storytelling. But I got into it. And when the fact that you started off with a story listing like nobody has ever covered that I've seen before, I just loved it. And you got into so many other things. Folks, it's powered by storytelling, excavate, craft, and present stories to transform business communication. And Murray has absolutely done this in his book. And so there are so many other areas that we could talk about today in how to craft a story and talk about what happened and that sort of thing, that I want to thank you, Murray, for coming in and just focusing on this listening side. Again, you're the first guest in 157 of them that we've really paid attention to that, which I kind of like the irony of that as well. We are so busy trying to tell our stories, show people our stories, that we don't take time to do the most important thing, and that's become a better story listener for ourselves and teach those around us how to become better listeners. Because it is my belief, and I've seen it in action, that when we truly listen, we get to dispel the judgments that we have about other people. When we truly ask them to tell their story and we listen to it, we have a greater understanding of who they are. It builds empathy between the two of us. So as you said, that reciprocity nature of storytelling grows even stronger. We find common ground, and it gives us a terrific appreciation for, the narrative arc, the journey that they're on. good or bad. So we know how to connect with them and how maybe we can be of greater support to them while they have that exact same feeling and understanding towards us. So it really does all start with listening, which is probably the hardest thing to do, isn't it?
Nothing harder. Nothing harder. We have to surrender our own agendas in order to truly be there to listen to somebody else. And I can really say, Park, that I appreciate the back and forth of listening and telling that we've engaged in today. And as I said earlier, even though we are in two different time zones at the moment, we are 3 hours apart. You're in the west of America, I'm on the east of America, the United States, and nonetheless, we've had on my side, such a satisfying communication because listening has been present.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Murray. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming back after fighting through our technical difficulties of me not listening to you. That it's just really awesome to have you here at Business of Story. Where can people find out more about you, get your wonderful book? How can they just learn more about narrative and the great things you're doing out there in the world?
Okay, it's my pleasure to tell you that the book is available on Amazon as a text, a hardcover book, but you can also listen to it on Audible. So you can get the book on Audible, and obviously it's also available as an ebook. So it's out on all those different platforms. And then to learn more about my company and the work we do, it's www.narativ.com. Now you will notice that we don't spell narrative the usual way. It's only got one R and no E. So we have coined a new term, and Narativ is actually the reciprocal relationship between listening and telling. So we've coined a new word. My aspiration is that word will become as big as Google one day so that everyone will know what an Narativ is. And it means that it is the connection, the relationship between listening and telling. But anyhow, that's a long way of saying that my website is www.narativ.com.
How do you pronounce that word?
Narativ or narrative.
Okay, so narrative or narrative. All right. And learning more about you, just the same place, same location, or do you have a speaker site?
Murray&nbsp.com. So you can go just to my website, MurrayNossel.com.
Great. Well, Murray, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your summer. And if you're ever out this way, please look me up and I'll do the same the next time I'm back in New York.
Thank you so much, Park.
Now, thank you all for listening and absolutely listening to this edition of Business of Story. If I can be of further service to you, you know where to go. businessofstory.com, tools, talks, techniques that you can use to become a more powerful storyteller, but nothing more powerful than becoming a better, greater, more honest and authentic story listener. And if you've got colleagues in your life, if you've got leaders in your life, if you've got loved ones in your life that you feel like don't listen, why don't you share this episode with them? Share Murray's background and what he's done. Get the book, Powered by Storytelling, Excavate, Craft, and Present Stories to Transform Business Communication, and see if you can't become the impetus for greater listening in your organization, in your families, with your colleagues, with your friends, because I really believe some of the greatest ills in this world is our lack of listening. And we're seeing them from the very highest levels of leadership down through our educational systems and certainly through the companies that we run, manage. And I think that just simply quieting our minds, quieting our souls, being present, getting focused, and truly listening to that person opposite of you, that you are going to gain greater understanding, insight, empathy for them, and a lot of the ills in this world that we can actually solve together, just simply by listening and building that reciprocity of storytelling. I love how Murray said that storytelling vessel of the listener, and then that storytelling communicator, the teller themselves, and it is a two-part symphony. It's not just one person going on and on. So with the risk of me going on and on, I'm going to shut down right now, and I'm going to ask you to come back again next week when we will have another amazing story artist like Murray Nossel right here at Business of Story. And until then, of course, always remember the most potent story you are ever going to tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.